space for four. You know that we start by remembering that the state of Tennessee sanctions the killing of persons who have been convicted of murder. They do that by law. And when we talk about laws, these are laws that are technically formed and constrained by the United States Constitution, which includes Fourth Amendment protections against search and seizure. Sixth Amendment guarantees a right to effective assistance of counsel. Eighth Amendment prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment. And Fourth Amendment, 14th Amendment, assurances that there ought to be some kind of fairness while all of this is happening. But it doesn't always work. We know that there are those who the state puts to death by mistake or by misdeed, and that all of the lives that are taken, intentionally or not, legally or not, create great risks in our communities, in our personal and professional and public lives. These are the risks that we seek to heal here at American Baptist College. Through the Spirit, through our work, and through the different professional gifts, graces, and structures that are represented. Tonight, we are very fortunate to close our 6-week series with a presentation by members who actually sit in halls and wield mighty pens that may have the possibility to be the change that we want to be in the world. And if you will permit me, because it is our last time together, I would like to lift a prayer that was first presented and prayed in November of 2018 on the evening of an execution here in Tennessee at a church service in our sister institution, Fisk University, in a service led by persons who are here in this room tonight. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. We pray for all the families whose lives have been devastated by homicide and who live with injury in body, mind, and spirit. We pray for those who kill. We give thanks for the work of the attorneys who struggle against the machinery of the death penalty. We pray for our leaders and policymakers that they might be guided by your divine wisdom and love as they make decisions of life and death. We pray for our government. We pray for all participants in the criminal legal system, for attorneys, correction officers, for the wardens, the commissioners, and for those who are asked to witness and carry out this most violent event. And we pray for our state and its citizens that we may become empowered to speak, to act, and to finally rid ourselves of the death penalty. Change our hearts and help us to seek the ways of peace and healing to address our violence and brokenness. O Divine One, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we are going into eternal life. Amen. And now I would like to end this by turning it over to my great colleague and just a tremendous pastoral force in this work, Reverend Stacy. And if you will join me, and if I have to take stage direction from my bosses.
so much, Phyllis, and thank you so much, American Baptist College, for hosting this amazing series. I said earlier, I'm tired, but it's a good tired. After 6 weeks of a lot of amazing presentations and conversations, we're so grateful that you are here. We're so grateful that Jerome Moore is back with us, that we have Senator Oliver and Representative Love, who are doing the very hard work at the Tennessee legislature, and will be here to share some of their ideas and thoughts with us. Would also just remind you, for those who maybe it's the first time you've been with us, we do have an information table out here with information about the death penalty, about Tennesseans for Alternatives to Death Penalty, which is the organization that Rafia and I are a part of, and that Phyllis serves on our board. And so we hope you'll sign up and get on our email list, pick up information. I also brought a handy little tool about how to write letters to the editor. And that's just one little thing that we want to throw out there, and there's lots of other tools for folks. But how do we get engaged, and how do we use our voice to educate and share? And I think that's a really good way to do it, so I hope you'll take one of those. And with that, panelists, it's all yours. Take it away.
How y'all doing? Y'all doing good? Y'all ready for this? I'm ready. I don't have the power of the mighty pen that they were speaking about these two wonderful people up here. So I'm gracious, and I appreciate the opportunity to be up here with Senator Oliver and Representative Love. So thank y'all. And I just want to just do a mental health check with you all. You know, y'all have went through a rigorous, rigorous sessions this past year. So I would just like to just check in on, are y'all doing all right? How's your mental health, and how's life? Representative Love, you can go ahead, yeah.
Well, so I think, well, first of all, thank you all for having us here. And I think one of the things that benefits Senator Oliver and myself is also proximity of location in Cordell Hall. The senator's on the 7th floor, we're on the 6th floor, but I'm fortunate enough that my office is right below theirs. And so every once in a while, I get up on the 7th floor, just walk the hall, just to see that there are other folks out there who are fighting. And the reason that's important is because when you're in the building, you can be isolated because of the way that Cordell is set up. The plaza was different. In the old legislative plaza, we were all on the same floor. The senators were in War Memorial, but at least they were sometimes in suites, so you had someone else in the office. And so now to be in your individual office, it can be a bit difficult because you're there and you come back into the office after having been in a committee. I don't know if Senator Oliver's experienced that same kind of situation.
Yeah, isolation is probably a good word for it. So yes, thank you for having me here today. It's Friday, so I'm trying to get my energy back up after a long week. But yeah, it's been a hard year. It really has, because this is the isolation that you feel. We're sort of a team of one. We only have one staffer. You know, we don't have a team of people who are constantly doing the research to make sure we're on brand, we're on our talking points, and we're ready to go in meetings. And you know, you're doing it all, and so it's a huge burden to carry. And then as myself, I'm the only Black person that represents Nashville in the Senate, and so you're carrying a huge burden in the voice of so many who are hurting and being attacked. And so I'm in therapy. I do therapy once a month. I try to keep myself, you know, prayed up and try to eat right as much as I can. And I'm drinking my water. You know, I'm trying to do all the things, do my health checks and all that. I have a good bill of health. So yeah, I think I'm faring well despite the dismal statistics in our state.
Yeah, no, I know y'all weren't expecting that as the first question, but I think it's important to always check on our leaders, inform to them from a mental health, body, mind, and spirit. And so I'm checking in, you know, and I encourage community to do the same thing, just not with our senators or representatives, anybody that's doing this work. A lot of times, you know, many of us are the first one to jump through these windows of this work, and people applaud us, but they don't think about the glass cuts, you know, from jumping through and the bruises.
Right.
And so I'm just want to, you know, put a little Neosporin on some of them cuts for you. But hopefully you all had a chance to glance at the Doomed to Repeat report. If you haven't, definitely do that, because we are doomed to repeat if we don't fix something. And I want to position this first question to both of you all, but you can answer first, Senator Oliver, around just the current criminal legal system state of Tennessee, and is it making us safer from a legislative standpoint? Is it acting in a fair and equitable way at this point for the state of Tennessee?
No, we're not safer. We've been under a controlling party for the past 13 years who does not want to address the root causes of criminal activity. Their response is always to throw money at the police and building more prisons, and as if that's going to solve everything, and we know it doesn't. You know, so, and we also have a Republican supermajority that's very invested in not moving an inch on common sense gun legislation. So no, we're not safer. We're seeing more mass shootings. We're seeing more gun violence. We're seeing more people. You know, we just implemented the 3 strikes law back into law, truth and sentencing. We are now looking at trying to lock up juveniles and put them in adult courts. You know, we're not safer. So, and then when you think about the statistic of guns being the leading cause of death for children, we're not doing the work we're needed to invest in making sure that our communities are whole, making sure that we have a livable wage, making sure that people have the mental health resources that they need, making sure that we're going to quality schools so we have you know, a workforce that can get these high-paying jobs. We're not investing in the root things. I believe that when you take care of the family unit, then the community will be good. And so we're not doing that. We're only focusing on big businesses in this state, prisons and police, unfortunately.
Representative Love, same question.
Certainly, I agree with what Senator Oliver has stated. The unfortunate thing is that when given the opportunity to make those investments, we have not. To that point of criminalizing behaviors that could be addressed in other ways becomes the norm. You talk about, I think my sophomore year, we looked at even revisiting the sentencing guidelines. And just as an example, one of the things we had to deal with was the fact that the floor for some sentencing of theft was $300. And we had to have the conversation around the fact that, you know, in 2015 at that time, that was a cell phone. Yeah. So we had to have the conversation about, hey, we need to rethink sentencing, right? We rethink what it looks like when it comes to making ourselves safer. And I would venture to say that one challenge we have not met is also making our children safer. When you think about the instances where our most vulnerable population, our children, are sometimes in very dire situations in homes where they may be mistreated. We talk about elders who may be getting abused. When you talk about all these things, there are much more important things that we can talk about when we want to talk about criminalization, right, of people. We miss the mark, and we don't make the investments into those type of situations where Senator Oliver and I experienced just in this past special session, focusing on juveniles. Yeah. When we know that children are having difficulty adjusting to their situations, the adverse childhood experiences that they may have. And so this is where we need to have the conversation about how do we make ourselves safe. But I would say to the class and the audience, the challenge we have is that Tennessee, outside of Shelby County, Davidson County, Hamilton, and Knox County, is a very rural state. And our colleagues need to understand that what makes them scared in their rural county causes detriment in an urban setting, right? Like, for example, the drug zone around schools. When you talk about doubling and tripling the sentencing, well, in a non-urban area, you may want to have that zone to be, 100 feet around a park or a school, but not in Nashville, not in Memphis, because then that is the whole area. That's the neighborhood,
That's the community, yep.
right? We're not advocating for sale of drugs, but we're saying oftentimes we found that there were situations where law enforcement would go set up right outside of the zone, right? And so those are the instances we have to face, is the attempts to make us safer could have been approached in a different manner.
You all mentioned investment a few times, and I'm curious if you all have any insight that you can share with us on the comparison of spending that is happening towards like policing and corrections and prisons, compared to what they're not investing in that would probably really keep young folks safer, community safer, but they're not putting that same amount of money, the same amount of funding into really solving the root cause. And I'll start with you, Representative Love.
All right, so we oftentimes talk about this, the budget being a moral document, right? But the budget also is a reflection of our values. If it's not in the budget, it's not what we want to see funded. And so there's a good amount of investment in K through 12 education. I think last year the amount in the funding formula was close to $750 million. But then when you get down to looking at, and I'll separate it out like this and leave Senator Otto to also get on this also. There's a difference, I want the audience to hear, there's a difference between funding for the administration of a jail and the actual prison, right? So TDOC, the department itself, may have some programs, and those need to be funded. And so those are the conversations we need to have about funding TDOC for reentry programs, right? Funding TDOC for teaching classes in prison, but we don't need to have a situation where we're funding at high levels all of these jails. And I know Senator Oliver probably has the numbers on a lot of these amounts, because once you start adding up all these prisons, you're getting close to what we're talking about for K through 12 education.
Yeah. So some numbers for you. The Department of Corrections budget is $1.4 million this year, which is about 2.3% of the overall $61 billion budget that we have as a state. Compared to pre-K through 12 education budget is $9 billion a year. That's about 15% of the overall budget. Department of Mental Health budget is $622 million, which is 1%. And then the State Violent Crime Intervention Fund is $100 million. So I just think about all the missed opportunities that we have had to fully fund education and those things alike. There was the article that actually just came out yesterday, I think I posted this, where we're doing budget hearings right now. Each department has gone before the governor to request their sort of, wish list of things. And in the TDOC budget, they're requesting $7 million more for Core Civic, which is the private entity that runs several of our prisons. And, they have a lot of hits on their performance audits. They have had many deaths to have occurred in the prisons, particularly Trousdale, and we're asking for more money to reward that. And I think that is a grave injustice. And so, yeah, we're at the bottom when it comes to student funding, raising wages, and those alike. And so our policy choices are really driving families into desperation and keeping them buried in debt, but also paralyzed by the instability of what comes with criminal behavior and being caught up in the criminal legal system. So absolutely, I think the funding piece is definitely disproportionate right now. And I also remember last year in the budget, we actually passed, I want to say it was 15 million. Don't quote me on that number. But we're actually reserving about 15 million recurring in the next 5 years to build an additional prison. Because what they're anticipating is with our forced birth state, coupled with the school to prison pipeline where we're implementing a third grade retention law that is falsely measuring the metric of performance in our public schools. When you couple all that together, they're anticipating more kids coming into the child welfare system, into the juvenile detention system, and then into the incarcerated system. So instead of, that is just, to me, a moral injustice.
So they just automatically statistically saying because of these things occurring, this is how many bodies we need to prepare for to put in prison.
Well, I think we keep this in mind also. Historically, prisons have been a great economic driver in counties. They employ the county. And if you just go down the list, for example, you have Bledsoe County Correctional Complex, payroll 40 million, operational 41 million. Riverbend, payroll 17 million, operational 16 million. You get into Northwest Correctional Complex, right? Then you get into, that's in Lake County, payroll 28 million, operational 29 million. Morgan County, correctional, I think it's one of our newest ones. In Warburg, payroll 36 million, operational 37 million. So what happens is, and this is why it's important to have these conversations, because when you start having conversations about closing the prison, we don't offer an alternative for those who would be employed. I'm not saying that that's justifying, the reality is when you have these conversations with our colleagues, right? In some instances, that's like on a federal level, you closing a base.
Wow.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that is the conversation I had this past session. That is how they think. I had a bill, and it's still alive actually, it's a prison gerrymandering bill that would redirect funds, census-based funds. So a lot of our federal dollars are based on the census and the population, and so what happens is our prison population gets counted in the county where they are housed, which are a lot of times in rural areas. And so this bill would count that person where in their home county and not the county where they're incarcerated. And so that then would redirect funds from based on census to that home county. And then so take Trousdale County, for example, the population growth grew by I think it was 60% based on the last census because of the prison population. And so when I talked to Ken Yeager, he's like, well, I don't know, because, these are jobs, and I don't, that the city and fire department that and the ambulances that take the inmates to the county hospitals, how is that going to impact them? So yeah, they're thinking about this from an economic standpoint.
How does that conversation become more like, okay, how can we create about maybe finding new jobs to replace this if we keep people out of prison? Like even though there may be a process,
sure,
why that's not part of those conversations, or why not other legislators thinking about that?
I think it's the same, and I'll say general issue we had in 2016 with a lot of our rural colleagues having coal mines closed, right? And that's the problem in West Virginia also. Coal mining had closed down, but that's all they knew how to do. no one's having a conversation about retooling them. But we had colleagues who wanted to reopen the coal mines. And we're saying, well, hold on now, you know this is bad for people's health, the way you're trying to mine. Yeah, but those are jobs they're used to. And so when you start talking about that, it's not only the county and it's not only the jail in that county, but also we're spending $111 million when we pay local jails to house our persons who've been charged and convicted of felonies. So when the state prisons are full and when Core Civic is full and they need a place to put persons who have felonies, because traditionally your local jails are for persons who have 12 months, well, 11 months, 29 days, right? But in some instances, they can house a person that is going to serve their felony time there, and the state is going to reimburse them. And so just, we're not justifying any of this, just let you know this is what we're dealing with. So you imagine $111 million goes toward reimbursing local jails for housing persons that ordinarily would be in a state facility, hence the desire by some of our colleagues to build another state facility to house. And what Senator Oliver is getting to is really important, because now you're talking about a situation where we're supposed to represent those who live in our district, but the injustice is when you have a population that's being counted as part of your county population, and they're now unable to vote, right? But they're being counted as part of your population. So you may have a person who is elected by 10,000 people, and the other 7,000, 8,000 are in prison, right? Or 300 or 400, whatever the number may be, right? But they're in prison and they're being counted toward that population. It's unbalanced representation.
And so I have a lot of conversations that, with judges and officials and things that say, hey, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. Well, what I'm hearing is economically, in the capitalism that goes into that people are not trying to really, they're not trying to put resources on the front end to be able to stop that millions and millions and millions of dollars that goes into job creation, but also that goes into the economic capitalism pumping of the prison system. And so is that realistic to think that people really want to work themselves out of a job where they don't have to have people in their courtrooms, where they don't have to have beds in county jails or in prisons? Is that a realistic thing to happen in a structure that we in that fuels in so much money from an economic base, especially if that's going to be people's reasoning and rationale? Like, hold on, wait a minute, we want to keep people safe and we want to solve this issue. However, we got people need jobs. We want to solve the criminalization of poverty and homelessness and the school to prison pipeline, but we need to think about the jobs.
I think the judges might be,
Yeah.
but that's a whole separate part of the actual person who is in the facility. That's a situation that we can talk about from the perspective of what's it look like for those persons who are in the system, right? I don't know if they are actively working toward that.
Senator Oliver, any thoughts on that?
I mean, it sounds good, right? It does. And I've heard people say that. And I've heard people in the nonprofit industry where I come from say that, yeah, we need to, I think every nonprofit should have a poverty reduction plan, going out of business plan. But, there are these systems, the nonprofit industrial complex, prison industrial complex. And I think it's hard for people to reimagine outside of what's possible. I think it's all we've ever known is a capitalistic, white supremacist type of environment. And I think people have a hard time really reimagining what does it look like to live in a society without prisons and police. Can we ever get there?
Well, that goes into the punishment and harm, right? I think some of us, especially just born in the United States, get conditioned and indoctrinated, right, with that punishment and harm, and it starts in grade school, right? And how you're reprimanded there, and then that's their school to prison pipeline. What are some ways that we can unlearn that? Especially, are there things that, from a legislative perspective, that we can be reimagining how we deal with crime from a restorative approach, but also not letting the answer always be throw them in prison, throw them in jail, lock them up. That's the only way that we can hold them accountable, really, by taking time away from them, right? Representative Love, whoever want to go.
Again, it's about innovation. It's about let's try something new. It's not working and has not been working.
Do you believe people want to try
Right.
something? Do like,
Well,
I just
our
like, do
system,
people really want to try something?
if you go back to what Senator Oliver was saying, right? Our government and our economic system are based upon a focus on scarcity. And we say economics is the allocation of scarce resources, and there'll be those who will say that politics is the authoritative allocation. Harold D. Laswell says that politics is who gets what, when, where, and how, right? It's not enough asphalt to pave all the streets in Nashville. Well, why not? Because we don't have enough. Well, why don't we, right? It's not enough concrete to give every neighborhood sidewalks. Why not, right? Well, we don't. Well, why, right? And it goes back to money. And so now what we'll say is there'll be those who argue that we must, for a safe society, right, hold some. Now, I will say this. For those who have committed extremely violent offenses, right, and have ended the life of persons, we can still yet find a way to have justice as defined by the family, right? What does their justice look like? But you have so many non-violent offenses where persons are put in the system and then they're forced to become that violent offender. And I think that's what we're talking about. There has to be a better way to deal with the historical influences. When you're talking about a child that has grown up in a house where there is scarce income. And let me just very quickly go here. We all have heard about the report from the Washington Post and the Beacon, not Beacon Center, but the Washington Post, talking about the 37208 connection to imprisonment. If you dig down in the report, you got to read the report, right? You dig, I'm Brookers, thank you, Brookers Institute. If you dig down to the report, what they did was they looked at a subset of people who were imprisoned and asked what was the common denominator. And so the Brookings Institute discovered that the common denominator was parental income. For those persons who were incarcerated in that time period, parental income was the prevailing influence. Then they said, well, where do you have the highest chance of being incarcerated because of parental income? And then it said 37208. So we're talking about if parental income was a major factor in people born in that time period having incarceration come into their life, right? Having a brush with the law and now being in prison, then we must say, okay, then if it's parental income, why can't we raise the wages?
Yeah, income,
right?
yeah.
Right? Why can't we raise it? Why can't we make sure that parents in this zip code have a better chance of getting employed and having living wages than everyone else in the city, right?
And a universal basic income.
right.
So everyone has a safety.
Since we know what the situation is, right? Because the science narrowed it down and said it's parental income, right? This was the major fact. It wasn't just being born in 208. It was the fact that those who lived in 208 had the lowest parental income, and you got a more than 7 or 8% chance than everybody else times to go to prison at some point in your life. So if we know that's the reason, then why not raise the wages in 208? Why not have a situation where the kids at Robert Churchwell and Jones and McKissick have a specific job fair just for those parents?
Right.
right? That you say for the parents in these schools, the job fair is for you. So that
Why is that so difficult when we have the statistics and why can we can't put the answers? That irks me. It's like we know the answers to the test. Why is there barriers to that?
Now you see why we walk around on the 7th and 6th floor.
What can y'all do?
We're doing what we can do.
But like from a legislative standpoint, if we know that, right? Like so many other things, and what's crazy about that study is, especially with the universal basic income, most people are only needing $1,000 extra a month. That's most people. That's not even just in 372, but the United States. Most people's like, if I can get just $1,000 more a month, I will be better off. $1,000.
Because we've been conditioned in this country to say that if African Americans make financial gains, then it's going to come from a non-African American, probably white community. We've been conditioned to believe that. And so we have a either or rather than both and mindset. Not us, right? But that's what society teaches. And so you have folks who tell you, well, if you let the black students in school, the white students can't get in. No, that's not the case, right? We can all go to school. If we bust the school out because there's too many of us, build a bigger school.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Senator Oliver, did you want to elaborate on the?
I mean, that's it. I mean, it's they know the facts.
That's so
the other
frustrating.
side
Like,
actually knows the facts. They know the reality. That's why they're pushing so hard right now.
Is it like gang wars at this moment at the legislative level? Is it like kind of like you got the Bloods versus the Crips at this point? And where it's like, regardless if it's good policy for my side, because I'm repping this color, like I'm just standing on that. Is that the relationship at this point on the Hill with some of your colleagues that may be on the other side of the aisle?
Believe it or not, we actually pass a lot of bills that
Okay.
don't make the news, right? That actually are passed by both, sides of the aisle. It's the hot button cultural war stuff that gets amplified. It's the controversial education stuff, and yeah, it is a lot of placating to their base, and they don't have to answer to anyone except their Republican primary voters, and sometimes not even them. So yeah, we are dealing with an extremist party that no matter how good the idea is, if it's a Democrat that proposed it, it ain't passing. That's where we're at. But next session, you might see that same idea stolen by a Republican. Because let me just tell you, I had a bill with Representative Powell, and this is wonky stuff, but mesonettes, they detect flooding, right? They can detect flooding 12 hours in advance of weather patterns. And so just so happened it passed, but it didn't get funded. But now the Department of Military is now asking for that to be funded in their budget. No mention of a Democrat or the bill, but that bill is getting funded, not by us, but by the governor.
There's a rite of passage that occurs in the legislature called bill jacking. It means that you bring a bill, and to Senator Oliver's point, it's not fair. But you will get argued down in committee about how bad the bill is and how unfair it is, and then magically, I had a bill dealing with removing used to be that your third arrest of half ounce or less of marijuana triggered a felony. First two were misdemeanors, and we discovered that law enforcement was using the threat of the felony to actually cause college students to be confidential informants, right? So we said we got to put a stop to this because or less is negligible, or less is residue, right? So we brought the bill and proposed it, and I got told in committee, I can't believe you bringing this bill, Representative Love. You want our kids out here through this gateway drug, and law enforcement lifted up a bag of cigarettes and like, this is half ounce or less. And I felt so bad. I said, no, I'm just trying to keep some kids from going to jail for some residue the next year. Bill popped up, had the same language in it, the exact same. Then they added like 4 or 5 other drugs. And I was like, I was just dealing with marijuana, right? They added some other stuff, but it's the unfortunate truth, right, that we have to laugh about so we don't get so upset, but they will talk bad to you about your bill, and or the department will take it, and then you just see it, and these are things that y'all don't know about, right? You have to just sit there and ask yourself, like, or your colleagues, do I stand up on the floor and remind them, or do I, sign on to the bill? These are the struggles we have, right, to get the bill passed.
Being that we have a supermajority Republican legislation at the moment, is there anything that you all are concerned about as far as policy-wise, legislation-wise, going into 2024 that can do more harm, more damage to the state of Tennessee?
I mean, besides the fact that just about every Republican bill that gets introduced.
Is it because as Representative Love mentioned, a lot of times, we're not privy to a lot of this information, or it goes over our head. We're not there every day, or if it's not like dramatized and it doesn't make the news, we may not be aware unless you grassroots and you're on the work and you're doing it all the time. So is there anything kind of specific that has come across you all's eyes that we should maybe be aware of and kind of like alarmed by, and the antenna should be going off?
Yeah, I had a list actually.
Oh, okay. Read it off. Read it off.
Just a few bills, but and
Print
these
that off for
have already
everybody.
been introduced. But Senate Bill 7027 by Senator Brent Taylor out of Memphis, Shelby County, the bill that transfers juveniles to adult court, coupled with Speaker Sexton's bill that imposes blended sentencing on kids that are in juvenile court. Those two are to me just terrible bills that would overburden our court system and our juvenile court system. So those two I think are really, really harmful. The firearms bill around lowering the age from 21 to 18 to allow an 18-year-old to carry a handgun in an open carry state is dangerous when you consider 18-year-olds still are in high school sometimes. Mark Goins sent out a memo related to voting rights restoration, and it has essentially made it impossible to get your voting rights restored after you have completed all your sentencing, parole, probation, based on a Supreme Court ruling that came out over the summer, that now you must, in addition to all these hoops and hurdles you gotta jump through and have all your court fees, fines, child support, all that paid up, you now must get a pardon by the governor, because now he's interpreting the law to both mean you have to do both and. In the conversation I had yesterday with my colleagues is, he's not a legislator. What gave him the right to just impose this, interpret this law this way when that has not passed the General Assembly? So that's something we got to address coming forward. And then there's a bill that actually already passed this past session around the death penalty, which is what we're here to talk about today. Senator Janice Bowling passed a bill that would basically expedite the process after all the appeals have happened. The person must be executed 30 days after that appeal. Now, the fiscal note on this said this is, even though we passed it today, because death row inmates are on average incarcerated over 30 years, that we're not going to see the effects of this until 2055, so another 30 years from now. But still, why are we doing this? So those are a few things I want to put on your radar that are real possibilities this coming session that could pass.
You got anything, Representative Love?
Nothing specifically that has been filed, but my concern always is when our colleagues have the epiphany that they must do something that could have been done if they'd worked with us. So for example, the unfortunate death of the young lady who was walking over in South Nashville brought back up the conversations about what we did not do in special session. I'm always concerned when our colleagues start to point at the other chamber and say, if they had done what we asked, then this would not have happened. You saw it happen after the Covenant shooting where they pointed fingers and said, if we'd had these, then it wouldn't have happened. Never getting to the root cause of it, but finding the opportunity. So my concern then becomes, will we start to further criminalize our juveniles, right? And put them in places where they will be stuck in the system? Will we use these conversations to, again, not talk about guns, but talk about and over-talk about and over-legislate something that does need attention, mental health and behavioral health supports, but not to criminalize it to the point where we don't talk about this main issue here. And so that's always my concern, that we'll do that. And I think just in general, when we're talking about not providing the availability for educational pursuits, right, and housing, these type of things that would keep someone from having these engagements with law enforcement or having these situations where they can't seek counseling. So what are the root causes? We don't want to fund those. And even going back to the violence interruption money, a few years back, we put $100 million into the budget, and then this year put $50 million in. The drilling down of it is the $100 million that was put in last year all went to law enforcement, right? And we tried our best to have conversations about working with nonprofits when they saw that they should have. 50 million was put in, but that 50 million went to the zip codes that had the highest homicide rate. So 9 of those, so 10 zip codes, 9 were in Shelby County, 1 in Davidson. But again, you all don't hear about that, right? The nonprofit community doesn't hear about that. And so this is where Senator Oliver and myself have to make those phone calls to Metro Police and say, hey, heard you got $5 million. All right, what's your plan to spend that $5 million as you partner with a nonprofit organization to reduce violence in Nashville, or specifically that zip code? And so that's part of our challenge. But I'm hoping that next year that they don't reduce that money, that they would increase it and then have nonprofits be able to be involved a little bit more.
Yeah, and I was gonna kind of get into that transparency part of it, right? How can community help build and be in community with you all, right? What are some things that we can do to amplify what's happening or what's not happening year round, right? Not just when something hits the headlines, not when somebody dies, or not when it's something just really just polarizing extreme, but when it's the stuff that's not maybe as polarizing, but it's just as important and can be just as impactful. What can we do to be a part of that year round? Not just when it's voting season, not just when it's special sessions or it's sessions year round.
So I think one opportunity we have, and the organization that Senator Oliver helped start, the Equity Alliance, would bring attention to the need to get involved politically year round. Historically, what we've done in our communities is we gear up for election day. Voting is part of a year-round process, but we've emphasized so much election day that what happens is the voter then does not get engaged after election day. The voter does not get told that they need to show up for a town hall or that they need to come to the city council meeting or the legislature, or if they just happen to be in DC, you know, stop in that committee meeting if they can, right? So what happens is we're not taught to engage year round. So what happens is there's no conversations about what may be coming up for a vote, and then it's always a fire alarm, right? Because we all sit around, we're like, you know, first responders. We sit around, and then when the bell is rung, we got to get up, get our jackets on, get on the fire truck, run out there to the fire.
Reactionary.
What would it look like if we were always engaged in the process? Because these are conversations that one needs to have about what policy looks like. What would it look like, right? If there were organizations that had persons who could, in their free time, and I'm glad to see Davey Tucker here, our president of IMF, because we've talked about doing a training for IMF, right? And getting everybody on rotation to where they say, okay, you know what? I can't make the committee meeting, but Tim can. He's available on Tuesday, right? He can't make it next Tuesday, but someone else can make it on Wednesday. So we have to do that because it is going to also engage those who might otherwise feel like, you know what? Perhaps I have a situation in my life where I can't vote. I don't have my rights back. I don't feel like I can engage at all. That's the person we have to tell, no, you can engage, because you can go to the meeting, or you can pass out the flyers for the town hall, or you can help organize the town hall, you can help organize the meeting. And it could be a 5-person conversation with Senator Oliver, myself, about what's coming up.
You got anything?
Yes, because I have a lot to say about this, but
We got time. Go ahead.
everybody knows. Does everybody know about the parable about the babies in the water? If you don't, it's a parable we always talk about in organizing about the babies floating down the river. And we're gonna stop, of course, if our human nature is gonna force us to go get those babies in the water. And I think that's where we are now as a state. We're all in our pockets just trying to grab the babies. Equity Line's over here trying to get folks voting. Folks are focusing on, reproductive health care, LGBT issues, housing, all the issues, you name them. And so we're just kind of scurrying along, all yelling at the legislature, right? And I have sat back for the past year, having come from this side, movement, and now being on this side and looking at what's going on. And I have sort of resigned to the fact that the fight is not in that building. And what I mean by that is the fight is outside. It's in the community. We have to continue the organizing, and we got to go upstream and go get the people and hold them accountable who are throwing the babies in the water.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's about the mission critical moment is the accountability piece that we a lot of times miss. Yes, we'll protest. Yes, we're gonna call our legislators. Yes, we're gonna show up. But what we are seeing is this extreme authoritarian fascist body is not moved by any of that. And so I have resigned to the fact that now it is time to get them out of office. And if it is now time to go into the rural areas, let's stop being comfortable in Davidson and Shelby. We have to get out of our comfort zone and go into these rural, there's black people in Winchester, Haywood County. There's black folks all, there are
people everywhere.
Oppressed people, poor folks,
Yeah,
and they need to know what their legislators are voting and doing, and start having meetings out there. Let's start go to their county commission meetings and tell them what's going on. And we got to get ourselves on the ballot, because we're letting a lot of people go unchecked on the ballot. Nearly half of the GOP seats in this state are unopposed. And we need good people to step up and run for office, or at least help somebody else run for office. Work on some campaigns. It's time to get into the fight. And so that's where I'm at with this. It's time to go get the people. He being the white males that sit in our legislature stand in the way of every single progress that we're fighting for, whether it's alternatives to the death penalty, abortion access, a livable wage, all the things they stand in the way of. So it's time to move them out the way.
What are some action steps of entry points into that organizing, getting into the fight? Because I believe everybody has a role, everybody has a social responsibility. If you're a human being, to try to make your community better in some type of way, form, or fashion. So just from experience, or just from natural experience, what have you seen as some of the easiest ways that people that are watching, people that are listening, people that are here tonight, that want to get activated, that want to be proactive and not wait and be reactionary to something harmful? It's too late, it's already happened at that point, but be proactive into getting into this work.
Well, I just told you, run for office.
Everybody can be
Sure.
Senator Oliver, you know.
But you know what? Senator Oliver and Representative Love need somebody to write speeches for us. We need people who can make the flyer for us. We need people who can do the research and write the policy brief or our talking points on the floor and give it to us. Because we are overrun and overwhelmed, right? So there is a role to play. Everyone has that role to play. And I think we're also not playing enough in the economic space of politics, where we're all pulling our money together. Because the corporations, they are investing heavily in influencing the politicians in power. And so how are we using our money to influence in elections? Where are we pulling to create PACs and create super PACs? Let's get all the PACs together.
Yeah.
How are we making sure our members are donating at least 1% of their budget into a fund so that we have people that we can pay as organizers? We got to kind of start thinking a little differently right now. So that's a little, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and I have a question about coalition building, but I won't Representative Love to.
Yeah, so to Senator Oliver's point, we have one staff person. And it's really unfair to senators because they have 3 times as many constituents. So outside of even trying to get a good bill passed or trying to stop a bad bill from being passed, we have constituent services, which means that when the preschool wants Senator Oliver to come by and be the speaker, she got to go. When the Boy Scout troop want me to come by and give the award at the banquet, I got to go. Because if we don't,
Are you a whole Facebook post?
right?
Most definitely.
And we got to go do the research on the bill, right, that we're trying to get stopped. Now, we're not complaining, we're just saying this is the reality. So the entry point can be the person who says, you know what, I got some free time, I got some experience in speech writing. If you ever need, or rather when you need, have your office call me, right? Or someone that say, you know what, let me be your person in the community when you can't go, right? That I can go and say, you know what, Representative Love couldn't be here, but here's a proclamation that we had your office print up, and congratulations. He wished he could be here, but he can't because he's out of town or she's with her family, right? And those are entry points for a person to say to those who own the battlefield, how can I assist? These are my skill sets. Because what it also does is it then clues you into what's really going on in the office, right? So you can then educate somebody else about what the process looks like. And so I think that's the first step. Second step is get educated about how to see, if you're gonna be down there, right, what the bill process, and then we talked about, even looking at caption bills, and let me say this to you all. It's not impossible. We're able to do it because we have to do it. But we were not born coming out reading bills, right?
You wasn't?
Even though sometime I think I may have been. because my summers were always knocking on doors for my father and didn't know what summer vacation was. But I still had to learn, right? And so that means you can too. That means everybody can learn the process. Everybody can learn how to maneuver through the website. Everybody can figure out what this means and learn the lingo, right, of what it means. The bill was deferred, the bill was rolled, the bill was, right, or sent to summer study, right? All these things. And so I think that's also a process, because what it does is this: it reduces the anxiety that a person has about, nah, I can't go. Man, that's show what y'all do. No. And we got to have folks down there in all the space, and even in the community, because when you go to those other communities, you have to be able to tell them, hey, let me show you what your representative voted on, and explain to them what had happened.
Go ahead.
I came back to the question.
Go ahead.
But,
get it off your chest. Go
no,
ahead.
there are entry points. Like, there are programs and groups that are doing political education. The Equity Alliance has a Liberty Collective program that we started for when we got alumni in the room. Rafia, Josh Wesley, Timothy Hughes, Zach Jenkins, Tamika, like all these people came through, and it gives you the baseline of, like, it just gives you a taste of all the different aspects of civic action. You've got Stand Up Nashville that trains you how to be on a board or commission. That's a huge entry point, because we've got over 70 boards in Metro that are powerful and have huge budgets. So those are some entry points too. Look for some of those programs. Emerge Tennessee helps train you to run for office. I think Labor has some, the M3 program, is that right? Tamika? MC3, thank you. Apprenticeship program. So there is support out there that you can look for to get into an entry point. And then the second thing I was going to say is knocking doors. Every candidate needs somebody to knock doors. That is the winningest strategy for a campaign, is to have a conversation on the door. A lot of times we have elections in August, and that summer heat, people don't want to get out there, but it is a sacrifice. We need people to knock doors for us. We need volunteers to go door to door, and we need them to go in the rural areas. So that's the least you can do, is spend a Saturday morning, knock about 15 doors with pamphlets, even just leave that literature, and don't be intimidated by actually talking to your neighbors. That helps.
I got 1,000 more questions. However, I'm going to open it up now, because I know people have plenty of other questions too besides myself. So there's a mic right there in the middle if you have a question. But if you don't, I got plenty more, trust me.
Good evening, everyone. My question is for Senator Oliver or Rep. Harold Love. When Charlane talked about the attack on the juvenile justice system, that pretty much what happened in special session, how are we going to keep them from charging those babies as adults? And my second question is around, when can we start having real conversations around wrongful convictions? We have so many people sitting in prison for crimes that they did not commit.
To your first question, this we have to look at where are the levers of power and influence when it comes to that, and a lot of it's around our judges, our juvenile court judges, who are against these policies. We need people who are in the space to speak up around that. I know Judge Sheila Calloway has been a huge asset to Nashville to lower the crime rates around juvenile justice. And so it's getting in front of our public defenders, in front of our DAs, getting some of these, bad DAs out of there, like Amy Wyrick, she had to go. So it's those getting in front of the trade organizations that have the biggest voices in those spaces, I think, can really stop some of these bills too.
And I wanted to piggyback on that, because I think, y'all were talking about Senator Taylor and the juvenile bills with Speaker Sexton, and I don't know if any of y'all saw, but Senator Taylor just wrote a letter to Governor Lee asking for state troopers to be moved to Shelby County because Shelby County's under siege.
The National Guard, right?
National Guard. This is all obviously preparing for 2024 session and setting up a narrative that Memphis is out of control, crime is out of control, and that the only way to address that is to hit the hammer as hard as we can, which gets to what you were saying. And I think I love the idea of trying to get the judges and the public defenders and those DAs out there who may have concerns about it, to speak. But I think part of what we've been doing in this series is talking about changing the narrative and taking the narrative back. And this whole idea that you referenced, Senator Oliver, of this tough on crime that we've been doing now in this country for decades, we're worse off. I mean, in so many ways. And there's just this doubling down on it. But the reality is, it isn't making us safer. It's not making our communities healthier and safer, right? The things that we all can agree that we want. And so how do we change the narrative out there in the media, like giving them stories, helping people to understand there's a different way of doing this, and it's connected to all these things we're talking about. The issue, Representative Love, you talked about the mental health issue. And I think that's an issue where everybody at the legislature can agree we're not doing mental health very well in Tennessee. But we have to have resources to do that, right? And so the more we hear, it's not the guns, it's mental health, well, then where's the Medicaid expansion? Right? You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
So it's connecting some of those dots for the public. And I think to the degree that we are able in our own circles and helping change that narrative of what we are doing doesn't work. And let's offer something else. So I'll sit down. I start preaching.
No, because part of what you're talking about is we have to put different images in front of our colleagues. So when you're talking about the image of African-American teenagers robbing people in Shelby County or carjacking folks, right? We then have to be intentional about saying, now, that's not all African-American teens. And here are a group of teens, because we have to communicate with them that what you saw was a snapshot in time. And you cannot have this policy that's going to affect everybody get passed. The upside for us is that in regular session, we have more time to do that. In regular session, we have more time to change the image that they see. Also, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to talk about, what does the role look like for us to engage media. Several years back, we had to keep having a conversation with media because when someone would get injured or robbed or harmed on Dickerson Road, 2, 4, and 5, and Fox story would be in North Nashville, right? That was the lead, right? In North Nashville. And we said, no, that's Dickerson Road, right? And so we had to have a conversation. I remember myself had a conversation with Ken Jobe, who took me down to Fox 17 to say, hey, listen, let me define for you, if you don't know. This area here, this is North Nashville. I don't care what anybody else tells you. This is North Nashville. This is Dickerson Road, right? Or this is some other area. And we saw the same thing happen with Tennessee State, right? When someone would get harmed right there on Charlotte. Close to TSU, no, it's equidistant between TSU and Vanderbilt, so let's have that conversation, right? And so part of our challenge is to have a conversation with media to say, this is what you all can do, and we can help you to sit down with producers to say, okay, when you have this happen, this is not how you tell the story. Because what happens is our colleagues see it and they, that's what we need to have done because it's out of control. And so I think that'll help also to paint the different narrative about our neighborhoods and our people.
And that's why deep dish conversations is important.
And that's,
Let me tell you,
So invest in that.
no, just real talk, because a few years back, the Convention and Visitors Bureau had a video that went all the way across the country. And they highlighted every neighborhood When it got to, they literally showed the track statue at Tennessee State. They showed Fisk University's name, showed Meharry's name, and they called it Marathon Village. Yes. Yes. So I had to call and say, hey, saw the video y'all got drawing folks to Nashville. But the one where you showed Tennessee State's name and Fisk University's name and Meharry's name, why are y'all calling it Marathon Village? Well, because behind Fisk was Marathon Motorworks. They were trying to rebrand North Nashville for the world as Marathon Village. We fixed it, right? But you got to have those changes in imagery to tell folks this is not what represents us.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Rafia Muhammad McCormick with TADP, Cohort Equity Alliance, and Mothers Over Murder executive. And we know that the public safety dollars are constantly being used towards punitive measures. And even though the data there shows that there's a correlation between public safety and education, I was so discouraged when I was sitting in special session, and just to your point, when y'all were sitting there and y'all have to have all these people keep on sending y'all all these pieces of paper with data on it to try to combat the GOP that just throws out anything. We're gonna put armed SRRs in the school because they can read stories to the children as well. What? Where have you seen even an unarmed SRO doing that? But my point is that there's data there. How do we what kind of language do we need to use to get them to use reallocate our public safety dollars to actually the contributors, especially on the education level? Because I don't understand how you argue for armed guards and then you go talk about let's not take federal funding for education, but I digress. How do we make those points with them? And if data doesn't work and it's anecdotal evidence that is for them, how do we get that anecdotal evidence in front of them?
Don't look at me.
I do wrestle with these questions. I'll be quite honest, because we're asking the same things. So we don't have all the answers on how we get through to our colleagues, but I think one sort of beacon of light is the fact that at least in the Senate, it's much more cordial, as you can have seen over the past year. I like to say the Senate is the retirement home and the House is the boys' locker room, high school locker room. And so at least they will have a conversation with you. That is at least what will happen. Behind the scenes, of course. Everything that happens in the Senate is behind the scenes, it's orchestrated. But they will at least have that conversation. I think that's where we do at least try to find a common ground is with them and talk to them. But again, I keep coming back to, if the politicians won't change, it's time to change the politicians. I just keep coming back to that. There is no, we're dealing with a party again who thinks what's the Invector stuff is ivermectin is supposed to cure and combat COVID. Like, we're dealing with people who we don't agree on the same set of facts right now. We don't agree that the media is telling the truth because they're calling them the enemy of the state. Like, and so that is what we're dealing with, and I'm not sure if we will get through to them, to be quite honest.
I know we're getting ready to go into general session. Quite a few of us in here probably have Day on the Hills that's going to be scheduled during that time. I just want to throw out a challenge to my fellow organizers that we need to really get together and promote each other's Day on the Hills, help organize around those so that we have as big of an outcome as possible, and that presence is there. Even if it's outside making press conferences with all of our own little testimonies.
I want to go back to Senator Oliver's point she made earlier as a response to your question.
And I had one more thing to say, too.
If we don't at least have 3, and I try to stay out the partisan nature of it, but if we don't have at least 3 changes in the House of seats, my concern is, my colleagues will say, we can expel 2 black legislators, escort parents out of the committee meeting, and nothing happened to us. See, that's the dangerous part, right? If you don't have at least 3, right? Prefer 4 or 5, but if you don't have at least 3 who are not coming back, if I was him, I would say, man, listen, we did all that, the world saw it, and we still all came back? Oh, well then what shall we do this time? That's what we have to combat, right? Is that's the piece where it involves going to these other counties and saying, and maybe it's saying to a moderate member, listen, you got to stand up and we'll help you, right? We'll make sure that you are covered and you're not pushed out, because we have some moderate members who are leaving, right? And so we got to say at least 3, because that will send a message that says you cannot do this and have, because the narrative is the people of Tennessee want it like this. That's the narrative being pushed. The narrative being pushed is that the supermajority came about because Tennesseans voted this way, instead of telling the truth and saying the supermajority came about through gerrymandering. It came about through drawing people like Joanne Favors and Tommy Brown in the same district in Chattanooga. That's how the seats were gained. It came about by drawing people like G.A. Hardaway in the same district with another Democrat. That's how the supermajority came about. It wasn't that Tennesseans chose a particular party to have the supermajority. Yes, they may have chose a particular party to have a majority in 2008, but in 2010, they redrew the lines in such a manner that you had Democrats running against, literally moving a street line. And so we have to tell that truth, that it didn't come about this way, because the narrative then becomes, well, this is what Tennesseans wanted. They wanted us to run the state. No, that's not what they wanted. They wanted you to have a majority, but then you took advantage and caused a supermajority where bills like making a skunk a pet animal becomes a priority instead of funding it. No, this is, right? And we had to say, this is what we're dealing with? This is the important bill? This is the critical thing we're going to deal with today. It's whether someone can have a skunk as a pet, because you can sell them for this is what we're dealing with instead of dealing with major issues. So that's we had to make sure that happens, is my point.
And one more point I wanted to make to her question was, how do we get them to listen? Well, who do they listen to? From experience that I've observed, they listen to the media, because they really like that media attention, but they also hate when things come to light that they're doing in the dark, such as expelling 2 black Democratic lawmakers. So we got to get to the media, to your point, and tell the narrative, but they also listen to big business. And we got to get in front of and put them on record. Corporation A, who we are consuming your products, why are you supporting and funding XYZ politicians? Your employees are being impacted by these issues. Why are you not speaking up? So we got to put a lot more public pressure on the people that they listen to, and the corporations, big business, industries, healthcare, they have wield a lot of influence in this state that we got to get in front of.
My question to you is, I guess from my perspective, about the complicity in racism with Democrats in the state.
So we going there tonight.
Well, I'm just figuring out. I mean, it's like we're presented with 2 choices, Republican or Democrat, whatever. They would tend to have the best chances of winning. But then we can see here in the state, particularly in these rural places, that some of the racial views are held by those who claim to be Democrats. so that when issues come up around race, there's no coalescing of the Democratic Party. Last election, when the woman out of Memphis, Bradshaw, was running for Senate, the way party politics work is whoever survives the primary, that state party devotes all of its resources toward that person. It didn't even happen with mailings, let alone hosting rallies around the state. It did not happen. So speak to issues of race within the Democratic Party in Tennessee, and what do we need to do to even address that issue?
Listen. Race is an issue. Let me affirm that. It is absolutely a problem in democratic, progressive spaces. And it shows up in the fact that donor A will donate and max out to white candidate, but also donor A won't donate to black candidate. It also, and I'll name this policy, the Tennessee Democratic Party has a policy that we don't invest in primaries. And I wholeheartedly will say that is a racist policy, because when you think about Shelby in Nashville, where most of our black representation is in the state, primarily, the only way we win is in a primary. So when you're saying you don't invest in primaries, what I hear you saying is that you don't invest in black candidates. So we got to change some of those issues. The state executive committee wields a lot of, let me not say they wield a lot of influence. They think they wield a lot of influence. And we're not holding them accountable to the policies that they uphold in the party. So there's a lot of that. There's we hire the white consultants to run our campaign, but won't give a chance to the up and coming fundraiser or organizing director or campaign manager who is black or of color. It shows up in that. It shows up when you won't even put a mailer or knock a door in North Nashville or Bordeaux, but you spending all your time in Green Hills. So yes, we got an issue. It also shows up in the fact that we ask our black people who work on campaigns to be field representatives, to work in the field, to go knock the doors, but we won't pay them to be the senior advisor to get paid in top leadership. So we got to change a lot of how we do politics on the Democratic Party side. That's a little bit of my answer.
Let me add to that. Going back to gerrymandering and when the House was lost, it was in 2008 that the House of Representatives was lost. Well, I'm going to say lost. It was in 2008 when the party leadership changed. Democrats had been in leadership until 2008. Coincidentally, that was also the same election for Barack Obama's first term. So one has to ask the question, how does the leadership of the Tennessee House of Representatives change in the same year that the first African-American president is elected? And then how do we find that in certain counties in Tennessee where you had your rural white representatives, Democrat, who decide to retire, then when a black candidate runs for the seat, they can't get elected, right? It happened to a friend of mine, Andrea Bond Johnson, West Tennessee, in Leader Craig Fitzhugh's old seat. He retired, and she couldn't get any support. He supported, but she couldn't win. So how does it go from that, right? Well, so my perspective comes from a historical place. My father was elected in 1968, and I still have at home the newspaper article of when the Black Caucus was born. Because my father and Avon Williams and Charlie Pruitt and Harold Ford Sr., as the article says, they had to make a statement to the white Democratic members in the General Assembly. And so one day, on a very important issue, they voted with the Republicans because they held the balance of power. So, as the article is written, the Republican senator says, they voted with us once. He said, but man, I knew it was over because the next day I saw my Democratic colleagues speaking to Senator Williams, and they hadn't talked to him the whole time he'd been in office. Because he knew then, he said, it's over. He said, the brief moment we had where they were going to vote with us was over because he saw them, the Democrats, right? So imagine this. In 1968 to 1972, as an African-American legislator, your Democratic colleagues won't even acknowledge your presence. It takes my father to tell the story that he served as vice chair of state and local government under 2 different chairmen. And it took a white chairman taking his own life before my father could be chairman. He had to keep waiting, even though he had seniority. Keep waiting, right? But it wasn't until Ted Ray Miller killed himself, right? And so these are the things that, in all candor, we had to deal with because in southern states, what you found was when Democrats started losing seats, in southern states, you had African Americans then in the majority of the Democratic elected leadership. And so there was some consternation when you had this sweep of Democrats now in leadership that were black. Because we shouldn't have to have first in 2020, right? Senator Agbear should have to be the first in 2022. Karen Camper should have to be the first in 2020, right? We're still having to get first. And so we've had to even have conversations internally to say, hey, listen, why is it, to Senator Oliver's point, why is it that we keep having a conversation and you all call our seats safe? Our seats aren't safe. You might have 3 or 4 folks primary you in primarily black districts. But then to your point, the party won't kick in. Even for incumbents, the party won't step up. And so these are the challenges we have to overcome. However, the alternative is not great. Let me be clear. I need to be clear about that. The alternative is not great. And so these are the conversations we have to have about how the party treats us better, how the party treats all of us better, and how the party values our role. Because the truth be told, if the House of Representatives gets back under Democratic control, it's gonna be because of black folks in Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and North Carolina maybe, that have caused the federal judges to say, redraw the lines, right? And so when you're talking about the role of black voters being oppressed, and now being no longer oppressed, possibly changing the House, we must consider that.
I know we on time. I just want to make sure we can continue.
Take these.
Okay, we take these. Okay, cool.
If they're okay with it.
Y'all all right with it? It's Friday. I know. All right. All right, we'll
It's
take
just
these
Founders Day, nothing major.
last 2 questions.
It's just Founders Day, nothing major. Just nothing major.
I want to go back to what you were talking about with change and what we must do and get your opinions on that. One thing I believe that we need to be persistent
And even though it doesn't look like the change that we are working for will take place right away, it's not Burger King, you can't have it your way, it's not fast, it's not quick, but I think we need to be persistent. And I want to go back to, and the first person I heard talk about this was Pastor Howard Jones. And Harold, perhaps your father talked about it with you when Avon Williams went statewide, setting up coalitions and chapters and committees all over the state. Now, that was a different time because it was heavily Democratic, but he set up those chapters, I will call
Tennessee
them.
Voters Council.
Yes, all over the state, so that you can make an impact. So when you're talking about, we need to go to these rural counties, we need to go to the county where Janice Bolin is, because I got a thing with her for canceling, she was the lead in dismissing the Economic Council on Women. Yes, me and her really ain't good friends. But the point is, we have to put people in place to face these people at their sites. So if what Avon Williams did gives us a blueprint, a guide to set it up, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to do it. And he was a man that was highly respected and feared, and he put that together. And so I just wanted to know your opinions about perseverance and using a guide that already exists so that we can effect positive change.
So I'll touch on a little bit of the last question and amplify this also. It was Democratic and Republican governors that did not fund TSU. Let's be clear, right? So it was both. To that point, I think that, and I use that as an on-ramp to, it took 50 years for me to pick up my father's report, right? And then get it acted on. So from 1970, the report was shelved, but picked it up, worked on it. I think there's a point that Senator Oliver raised that I want to expand upon. It's Metro Council boards are powerful. There are also a lot of vacancies on state level boards where people need sensible folks to be on there. There are a lot of vacancies, and I encourage you tonight, go onto the Secretary of State's website and click on the section where it says publications. And then a section for boards and commissions. And you can see that there are a list of vacancies. You might find something that piques your interest, some area where you have a expertise in, and you need to let us know, because a lot of those boards have a designation for someone from Middle Tennessee.
Or is African American.
Or is African American, right? Or for those who are non-African American who are here, still from Middle Tennessee. And you can have a chance to sit on the board and now tip the balance of that scale, because now I'm just going to assume that if you're in here, you're sensible. Maybe, right? Or you want to be sensible, right? And so this is a chance for you to be in that place, because we need you in that room with that board or commission that's making a decision about folks' lives, because it's not just bills, it's also departmental policies. The Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth has a whole new slate of folks on it now. We need folks who care about young folks to be in that place and won't be punitive, but will be caring, right? So you got commissions for hairstylists, funeral directors, all these things. Senior care centers, right? All of this. So when you're talking about issues with regulation, we need folks on those boards who are looking at and engaging in making policy, making change, because it's not just in the plaza, I mean in the Capitol, it's gonna be where this commission meets. And if we don't have sensible folks there, you have somebody there who is maybe serving and they're tired of serving, and the other non-sensible folks are now on it.
I connect.
Oh, you got names? You got a list?
See me afterwards.
Thank you all so much for your time, and I really appreciate that last answer because that really kind of ties into what I was, wanting to bring up anyway. It's just that engagement, that participating, getting involved. My man said brought up a great point about the racial aspect of the Democratic Party, and I kind of look at it as with some sort of optimism in a way because of where we are today, and we know that things are changing. But it doesn't just change on its own. We have to be the ones to change it. And so I guess I'm a little bit hopeful because I know that if we can turn out, voters and get people more engaged, then we can put ourselves in these positions to have the power to make decisions. And so that does lead me to, I just wanted to state that on a local level, I myself, and inspired by you all and whatnot and what everyone's doing, I'm actually going to be running for the Davidson County Party Executive Committee.
Very good, very
And
good.
so for District 1. And so I would encourage anyone else, there's lots of slots that are open. I feel like that is just a small way that we can change this thing because, and Tamika was actually the one that had brought me on and got me, in there. But I just feel like that's where it starts. We just start on a local level, and then we get more fresh faces. We get people that are more progressive, that actually care about the vision. Then it just expands from there until we eventually start affecting the way that the Tennessee Democratic Party works. And then maybe they can start investing because they feel that pressure now. We've got new ideas. We've got better people that are more open-minded. So, I guess it's not really a question. It was just more of an optimistic note. And so I appreciate you all's time tonight. And, thank you.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Y'all have any last words?
I'm telling you just how important that role is. When you have a person who is qualified to run as the nominee from the Democratic Party, if something happens to them, right, and they have to withdraw, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Tamika, if they have to withdraw or God forbid they fall ill, and they have to vacate that nomination, the entity that's charged with appointing their replacement is the Davidson County. Is that correct? Sort of. Hit me if I'm wrong about that. Because I've seen some appointments where someone was the candidate and they had the
So it's a little complicated, and I'll give you a little bit more context. So within the Davidson County Democratic Party, we are chartered just like the Metro Council. So we have, is this thing on? Okay.
you can say talking to it.
Okay. Can I move it? Is that it? Okay. So we are chartered by the same charter as the Metro Council. So we have an executive committee man, an executive committee woman that represents each individual district. So we are elected, and to his point, to serve in his district. He will be the committee man for District 1. If he happens to decide he doesn't want to do it and there is no one, we will then see if there is, what was your question?
I was talking about I see, like if I get qualified to
Like on the state level.
Right.
Okay.
If I'm qualified for District 58 and for whatever reason I decide after I have qualified to run, right, and there's nobody else running, if I decide I don't want to run, right, who makes the appointment to that seat? Let's say I die, right? God forbid, right? But then who makes the appointment to fill that nomination?
The Metro Council.
Even though I haven't won the race yet?
Even though they will look to the party, the local party, to give them a nomination.
Right.
But
That's the point I'm making.
they will look, the city
Right.
has to appoint, but they will look to the local party to see if there's someone to fill that vacancy.
And I want to make a connection with him about just how important that position is, not just a seat, right? That if
Right.
something happens, or if I had to resign, right?
Right.
Then before the election, then y'all got to make the recommendation to Metro Council. Yeah.
Yeah. And we do have so many vacancies. So there are 35 council districts. So that's 2 people for each district. We can have 70 people serving in that party. We also have at-large members that service the whole county. Our at-large members are not elected. They are then appointed by the elected body. Nominations, petitions are open now. You can go pull them. You have to December the 14th to qualify at noon. If you have more questions, I can talk to you guys about it after, but it's so important to not have so many vacancies because the work has to be done. And the more vacancies we have, the more work we put on one person or two people to pull all that weight.
Everybody give a hand for Senator Oliver and Representative Love. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much as I'm standing in for Phyllis Hildreth. Again, at American Baptist College, we want to thank you, Representative Love, Senator Oliver, and Mr. Moore. We want to thank you for your time that you've put in, how you have come to share with us, to give us all the information we need. And American Baptist College, what we want to do is to make sure we are in the game. And so what I want to share just briefly with you guys is here recently we've been working on our accreditation process. And what we found out was our accreditation agency said we needed to have an enrollment management plan. And we did the work to do this enrollment management plan. And what we found out was that there are some counties that American Baptist College needs to show up in that we have not shown up in. These counties, the top 10 cities with the most black or African Americans, Henning, Mason, Galloway, Brownsville. We do show up in Memphis, Stanton, Bolivar, all of these counties. A few weeks ago, our director of enrollment management, she went to the Covington, Tennessee area, and she talked to some high school guidance counselors. And what she found out was this academic year was the very first time that these high schools had had people employed to talk to students about opportunities to go to college. This academic year was the first time. So these students, they go to the tech college in their neighborhoods, but they are not necessarily aware of the options that they have. And so American Baptist College is poised to step into that space so that we can let students know, hey, you can come to Nashville, you can come to American Baptist College to learn about social justice, to learn about housing deficiencies, to learn about the death penalty and what is going on with it, to learn about theology and Bible and entrepreneur leadership. We are poised to do that. And so we ask that you guys help us with that to get the word out about American Baptist College, because that is just a point to help you guys with the work that you are doing from the end of education. And so I am so incredibly thankful that we've had this presidential lecture series. I want to thank you, Stacey Rector, for the work that your organization, what you have done. And we want to keep the conversations. We want to keep the pressure up. We want to keep doing these things. It's important to make sure people are aware. One of the first things is when people are not aware, they cannot do. And so it is these kinds of events that help us become aware of what needs to be done. So thank you all. Thank you to the class at American Baptist College. I see students here. I hope you make sure you get your assignments in. Dr. Hilder, she'll be making sure, she checks up on that. And so we want to end tonight. I want to have Reverend Tucker, if he would come up and bless us as we leave this space going into our weekend and our weekend work.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face to you and give you peace.
Amen. Thank you.